All right, everybody. We're going to go over some problems that you would have done in class and ask you some questions on them. So this is half review. Well, actually, this is mostly review. So we are going to ask you questions on them, but let's just go through the vocabulary. So polynomial, we're going to do last because basically a polynomial, remember, is all the different is basically the umbrella. Poly means many. So basically, if you have a expression, a number and a variable that puts together, that's a monomial. Okay, because there's one. Now you could say 3x and it's a monomial. You could even put x squared, it's a monomial. You could even put another variable, and 3x squared y is a monomial because it's a group of a multiplication of numbers and variables. Binomial means there's two of these. So, for instance, 3x squared, if you have a plus sign, plus 2, that's a binomial. Y squared minus 7 is a binomial. Even x plus y is a binomial because there are two monomials, and you can either have a plus sign or a minus sign. Trinomial means there are three of them. So 3x squared plus 2x plus 9 is a trinomial. X minus y plus z is a trinomial, even if I put a 3 out in front or a 13. But either way, there are three monomials in one. Now, basically, whether you have a trinomial, binomial, or monomial, we would consider those all polynomials. All right? So, for example, just for a question, I'm going to ask you a couple questions about these vocabulary words. So please make sure you go back and check them if you're having any confusion on them. And then we talked about in class how we multiply different polynomials. So the first example I can tell you is we talked about in class that the key is to remember that when you have a monomial times a monomial, you can multiply the numbers and you can multiply the exponents that have the same base. Well, the base is here is x. So first of all, 3 times 8 is 24. Now, x to the third power times x to the fifth. Now, you are multiplying them, but the trick in multiplying exponents that have the same base is you just add the exponents. So 3x to the third times 8x to the fifth is 24x to the eighth. So x to the fourth times x to the ninth times x to the fifth. Go ahead and what would that be? Okay, and hopefully you just said, well, there's 4, 9, and 5, and if they all have the same base of x, so that would be x to the 4 plus 9 plus 5, or 18. X to the 18th power. Now, in class, you also learned that you can multiply a monomial times a polynomial. In this case, it's a binomial because 3x minus 9 is a binomial. So we just talked about using the distributive property. So you have to just distribute the 4x into both terms, and then we just use our rules that we just talked about. So 4x times 3x. So 4 times 3 is 12. And x is really x to the first times x to the first. And if you do 1 plus 1, you get x squared. And then 4x times negative 9. Remember, think of this as a negative 9. You get negative or minus 36x. Because the x just stays, and 4 times 9 is 36. We would also accept 12x squared plus a negative 36x, because remember, subtracting 36x is really just like adding a negative 36x. Either one of those is fine. Go ahead and try this one for us. 4m squared times this trinomial. Now, hopefully when you distributed, you got 4m to, sorry, not 4m, 12m, because 4 times 3 is 12. And then m to the second times m is m to the third. It's minus because negative 3 times 4 is negative 12. N times m squared is just m squared n. And then 4 times 4m squared is just 16m squared, because there's nothing to multiply that m by. Go ahead and try this one for us, especially if you got that last one wrong. What do you get as an answer? All right, so hopefully you said 3n times 2n squared would be 6n to the third. 3n times negative 5 is negative 15n. And 3n times positive 6g is positive 18 gn. Usually when we have two different variables, we keep them in alphabetical order. So if you said ng, it still is right, but we just like to put the g first because it is alphabetically before n. All right, so in class, we learned that when you had a binomial times a binomial, your parents and a long time ago, they used to teach something called FOIL, which would be, you multiply the front, the outside, the inside, and the last. But really all that is just understanding that when you have a binomial times a binomial, you take the first binomial and you're essentially distributing the both of these terms. Actually, I'll use two different colors. The m and the positive 5, you distribute them separately. So the first thing we're going to do is distribute the m to both of these terms. M times m is m squared. M times negative 2 is negative 2m. And then we're going to distribute, I'm going to go to the bottom, but we're distributing the 5 to the m, which is positive 5m, and then distributing the 5 to the negative 2, which is negative 10. And your last step is to combine anything you could combine. So these are both have an m to the first power, so you could combine these. So you get m squared. Negative 2m plus 5m is positive 3m, because negative 2 plus 5 is positive 3, and then negative 10. Notice that you keep, it's like an apple plus an apple is 2 apples. You don't change the variable when you're adding them together. So m plus m is just, you just keep an m. So just a reminder, when you multiply m times m, you get m squared. But when you add m plus m, you just think of it as 1m plus 1m, which means you have 2 m's. So look at the difference between those two things. So go ahead right now and try the first one right here. So when you distribute the 2m, you end up with 12mn, and then 2m times 9 is positive 18m. Negative 5 is negative 30n times negative 5 is negative 45. So what you guys do here is there's nothing to combine. So this literally is your final answer. You can't combine anything. Try for this one for me, please, right now. Okay, just in case you got it wrong, when you distribute the 2m to both terms, you get 12m squared. 2m times negative 5 is negative 10m. And then we're going to distribute the 2. 2 times 6m is positive 12m. 2 times negative 5 is negative 10. And what you're going to notice right now is you can combine, there's two terms that have an m on them. Negative 10 plus 12m, so you're just going to do negative 10 plus 12, and you end up with, positive 2m. So our final answer is 12m squared plus 2m minus 10. Last, we talked about in class that when you have a binomial squared, a lot of students try to distribute this to the 2 to both of them. And a lot of times they will wrongly say it is 36 plus m squared, but that's not true. Because 6 plus m squared means you're multiplying 6 plus m times 6 plus m. And you don't get, what we just did is a binomial times a binomial. You don't get 36 plus m squared. Let me show you. You end up getting, so remember, we're going to distribute the 6 first to both of those terms. 6 times 6 is 36. 6 times m is positive 6m. Then we're going to distribute the m to both terms, and you get m times 6 is 6m again. M6 is, we always put the number first. And then m times m is m squared. Now we're going to combine the 6m and the 6m, and you get 12m. And we're going to write this in standard form, which means ax squared, so m squared, plus 12m plus 36. Now, one thing your teacher's probably going to told you in class is that there's a pattern here, and some of you are going to notice that. So keep an eye on that because we're going to go through that later. But there is a pattern that when you have a binomial squared, a lot of students are able to write it without doing all the multiplication. So if you could do that, great. But again, just something to think about for later on in the year. But what I would do is if ever you get a binomial squared, I would write it out twice and multiply it just like we did. Try this one for me. So hopefully you did 2m plus 5 times 2m plus 5. And when you distribute the 2m to both terms, you get 4m squared plus 10m. When you distribute the 5 to both terms, you get plus 10m plus 25. You combine the things that can be combined, which are the 10m's, and you get a final answer of 4m squared plus 20m plus 25. Right? And please watch this Edpuzzle video. We're going to also post it under the Zoom links, but so you don't have to sit here and answer all the questions again. And we'll do that tomorrow after you guys do this. But please make sure anything you got wrong, go back and do again and write down and come in for reteach, reassess, and we're happy to go over with you. All right? And that's how you do those problems.